The Marvel Cinematic Universe is a triumph in every possible way. 20 films, all generally well received over the course of a decade. A proposition that, if it were presented to studios back in 2006, would seem as improbable as world peace in our lifetime. The stories, the characters, the action, the special effects, all evolving with each passing year, leaving us with a new technical marvel to feast our eyes upon, though nothing is perfect. Prior to 2017, there was one major criticism of the MCU that seemed to echo from the major entertainment outlets to the fan forums. Even among hardcore fans like myself, if you were to ask them to find one weakness in beloved films like Guardians of the Galaxy or Civil War, they would all point to the portrayal of the villains. With the exception of Loki and maybe one or two others depending on preference, a series of all-time classic villains from the comics were constantly underdeveloped from a narrative perspective. This is a criticism that Marvel Studios leader Kevin Feige acknowledged back in early 2017, yet validly rebutted, saying that sometimes what serves the overall story the most is focusing less on the villains. Given the success of these films, who could disagree with this prevailing formula? Then, as 2017 rolled around, I gratefully noticed, along with my fellow fans, that the villains seemed to be receiving more narrative care. Bad guys like Vulture, Hela, and Killmonger became increasingly three-dimensional, more than mere props to advance the story. And then I saw Avengers Infinity War. The character of Thanos seemed to be instantly embraced by myself and the wider movie-going public, as not just the greatest MCU villain, but one of the greatest villains to grace a silver screen in a long time. I found it absolutely fascinating that a movie already filled to the brim with heroes needing screen time managed to portray such a complex personality, as intimidating in his physical presence as he is with his twisted psychological makeup, a villain with an almost Shakespearean level of inner conflict. As thousands of videos and forum posts poured forward on the character, a series of questions arose in my mind, one of which was a simple musing. What is it about Thanos that makes the wider world want to put him amongst the great cinematic villains? But before I could answer that question, it broke off into several other questions with much more disturbing implications. Though he is genocidal, why do we somehow understand? Though he is violent and cruel, why do we somehow empathize? By investigating these uncomfortable queries, I believe I have found an explanation for Thanos' terror. But be warned, you might not like the answer. Not because I'm wrong, but because I just might be right. To best understand Thanos' allure, I figured it might be useful to find similarities between his character and pre-existing figures, be they fictional or non-fictional. I figured the best place to start would be with the actor who portrayed Thanos, Josh Brolin. While doing my research for this video, I came upon a couple of interviews Brolin had done regarding his approach to portraying Thanos. To my delight, I found that the one character he took heavy amounts of inspiration from was the character of Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now. I say it was to my delight because when I learned Kurtz was a huge inspiration for Thanos, what followed from me was an emphatic, of course he was. Apocalypse Now is one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time, and Colonel Kurtz might be my favorite movie villain of all time. No other piece of cinema has ever thoroughly investigated the motivations of human evil, specifically what might drive ordinary human beings to commit murderous atrocity. In the case of Colonel Kurtz, the film traces how a once decorated army official, noted for his intellectual genius and physical aptitude, slowly degenerates as he confronts the war's twisted face. Not just that, but the hypocrisies of those who perpetuate the bloodshed. Discontent with the reality of the Vietnam War, particularly with the liberal use of violence and how the powers that be justify it, Kurtz created his own reality. He took full command of an outpost deep in the jungles of Cambodia, where the indigenous peoples treated him as a demigod. Disillusioned by his surroundings, by the injustice, by the moral relativism, he chose to enact his own command, using increasingly violent methodology, to the point where his superiors determined he had gone insane. What makes Kurtz so unsettling is that even though his actions are obviously morally reprehensible, his perceptions and statements are arguably arguably correct. Every word spoken by Kurtz in this movie comes from a place of deep introspection and rationality. For instance, though he will decapitate somebody merely for taking his picture, his peers cannot judge him because they have all committed equally immoral acts during their stay in Vietnam. Acts that are justified by a seemingly moral end. In this miasma of moral uncertainty, Kurtz embraces the savage side of human nature and seeks to remake reality via his will to power. It is through his will, justified by his record of physical and mental brilliance and the success in his brutality, that he finds so many followers in not just the Vietnamese, but defected American soldiers. It is Kurtz's conclusion about the moral relativism of the American military that makes him so terrifying. Even though he is committing murderous atrocity, there is logic in his madness. If the military can use unsound methods in the pursuit of an ideal, why can't he? After all, the horror and evil that surrounds him is enough to corrupt the most penitent man. So is it so wrong to pity Kurtz when his surroundings corrupt him? Why should we believe that if we were in his place, we would do any better? The probability that we would is staggeringly low. Thanos' motivations have striking similarities to Kurtz. His home planet of Titan was irreversibly corroded by governmental mismanagement. As a result, he struggled to survive under the harshest of conditions. Put yourself in Thanos' shoes. If your home planet imploded due to overpopulation, lack of resources, and the warring over these and other political issues, do you think you might feel resentful? Would it be wrong to feel resentful? Would that resentment maybe lead you to believe that it's not just Titan that was corrupted, but reality itself? What kind of universe would permit this level of seemingly pointless tragedy? Without a clear answer to this question, is it all that illogical to seek some form, any form of revenge? Even though I would say no, it does not justify revenge, these are nonetheless powerful questions that don't have universally accepted answers. It is exactly the lack of sufficient answers to these questions that motivate the greatest of villains. It motivates them to seek revenge against the structure of reality, because trying to live morally in a broken universe has not only become intolerable, but seemingly untenable. Therefore, any means justify the end of rebuilding the universe. This is not just the essence of Thanos' motivation, but the essence of evil itself. It is here that evil can find justification for the most horrible of actions. It is a timeless motivation that extends over millennia, and it is those who embrace that mindset to the greatest extent that elevate them amongst the highest ranks of villainy. But this poses an intriguing question. Who embraces that mindset the most? Is it Thanos? Maybe not. After all, it's a bit too early to tell. If you might humor me, I would like to propose one character in particular: the Christian concept of the devil. Put aside your religious convictions or lack thereof regarding whether or not the devil quote-unquote exists. The figure of the devil is globally recognized and has been recognized by billions for thousands of years. At the very least, the image of the devil, the symbolism of the devil, holds sway over us as the hypostasis of the human spirit distilled down to its essence. For centuries, theologians and fiction writers have tried to distill the devil's motivation into an accessible and sometimes entertaining form. Arguably, the pinnacle example of this distillation is a reinterpretation of an old German legend called Faust, a play by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The story of Faust might sound familiar to you, as it has been adapted so many times in fiction that it has been accepted as a sort of literary archetype. Great stories about confronting human evil might be described as Faustian. In Faust, the titular character makes a bargain with a character named Mephistopheles, who personifies the devil. Faust signs over his soul to the devil in exchange for knowledge that exceeds human capability. However, because the devil is involved, naturally this bargain goes horribly sideways. What is truly poetic about Faust is that during the course of the story, Goethe manages to summarize the complexities of the devil's motivation into just a few sentences. When Faust asks Mephistopheles who he is, he replies with the following: "I am the spirit that negates, and rightly so, for all that comes to be deserves to perish wretchedly. 'Twere better nothing would begin. Thus, everything that your terms, sin, destruction, evil represent, that is my proper element. Unlike Thanos, who seeks to keep some form of reality intact, the devil takes it one step further. Mephistopheles essentially says that reality is so full of heart-wrenching tragedy that it would be better if it had never existed. Much like Thanos, the devil speaks succinctly, eloquently, and rationally about the nature of reality. Even if their ultimate conclusions are evil, the depths of their perception command a certain level of authority. The pain they feel lends them some form of legitimacy, despite their genocidal aims. Now, do not misunderstand, I am not justifying evil, but merely explaining it, so one may avoid its allure at all costs. It is, after all, alluring. If one were to believe that reality is good, that life is good, that moral systems are desirable, only to have these beliefs so effectively challenged, it may cause moments of weakness, where we forget our humanity, where we forget the sovereignty and divinity of each individual born into this world, and crush them out of spite. And it is the power in that temptation that Thanos astutely exploits in his opening monologue.
I know what it's like to lose. Feel so desperately that you're right. Yet to fail, nonetheless.